The bullet shattered the saloon window just as Nora Jenkins stepped onto the frost-covered boardwalk, and she knew immediately that staying another night in Bismarck, North Dakota, would likely get her killed. It was December 1883, and the winter had come early and brutal to the Dakota Territory. Nora pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her thin frame, watching as men poured out of the Lucky Strike saloon, shouting and firing pistols into the darkening sky. She had arrived in Bismarck 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and $15 sewn into the lining of her worn carpetbag. The money was gone now, spent on a cramped room above the general store and meals that barely kept her standing. The dress shop where she had found work had closed its doors 2 days ago when the owner fled town with a gambler, leaving Nora and 2 other seamstresses without wages or prospects. The temperature was dropping fast as the sun disappeared behind the frozen Missouri River. Nora's fingers were already numb inside her thin gloves, and she could see her breath forming clouds in the bitter air. She needed to find work, and she needed to find it soon, or she would freeze before she starved. The problem was that Bismarck in winter was not kind to single women without family or means. The respectable positions were few and closely guarded, and Nora had already been turned away from every boarding house, restaurant, and shop that might have hired her. She started walking toward the edge of town, where she had heard there was a ranch that sometimes needed help with mending and cooking. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had left. The wind picked up as she left the main street, cutting through her coat like it was made of paper. She had bought the coat second-hand in Chicago before heading west, and it had seen better days even then. Now it was little more than fabric held together by hope and a few remaining threads. The road stretched out before her, a pale ribbon in the gathering darkness. Nora had walked perhaps a mile when she realized she had made a terrible mistake. The temperature had dropped even further, and the wind was howling across the open prairie with a ferocity that stole her breath. She could no longer feel her feet, and her teeth were chattering so hard she bit her tongue. She tried to turn back, but the wind pushed against her, and she stumbled, nearly falling into a drift of snow that had piled against a fence post. That was when she heard the sound of hooves on the frozen ground. Nora looked up through watering eyes and saw a figure on horseback emerging from the gloom. For a moment, fear overtook even the cold. She was alone on a deserted road with no way to defend herself. But then the rider drew closer, and she saw that he was simply a cowboy, his hat pulled low against the wind, his coat collar turned up around his face. The man reined in his horse and looked down at her. Even in the dim light, Nora could see the concern in his eyes. "Madam, what are you doing out here?" His voice was deep and rough, but not unkind. "You will freeze to death before you get anywhere." Nora tried to answer, but her jaw was shaking too hard to form words. She managed to gesture vaguely in the direction she had been walking, but even that small movement made her sway on her feet. The cowboy swung down from his horse in one smooth motion. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the weathered look of a man who spent his life outdoors. Without asking permission, he began to unbutton his heavy sheepskin coat. "No," Nora managed to say through chattering teeth. "You cannot." "I can and I will," the man said firmly. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was still warm from his body, and Nora could not help the small sound of relief that escaped her lips. The coat was heavy and lined with fleece, and it smelled of leather and wood smoke, and something else she could not quite name. "But you will freeze," Nora protested weakly, even as she pulled the coat tighter around herself. "I have walked home cold before," the man said. "I will do it again." "Where are you heading?" "The Broken Arrow Ranch," Nora said. "I heard they might need help." The man shook his head. That is another 5 miles from here, and the Broken Arrow is not hiring. Old man Carter died last month, and his sons are selling the place." He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes taking in her thin dress and worn boots. "Where are you staying in town?" "Above the general store," Nora said. "But I cannot pay for another night." The cowboy was silent for a moment, and Nora could see him thinking. Finally, he said, "My name is Vincent Vale. I work at the Double V Ranch about 2 miles west of town. We have a bunkhouse for the hands, but there is also a small cabin where the ranch cook used to live before she married and moved to town. It is empty right now. You could stay there tonight, at least until you figure out what to do next." Nora knew she should refuse. She knew nothing about this man except his name, and accepting his help could put her in a dangerous situation. But the alternative was freezing to death on the side of the road or going back to town with no money and no prospects. She made her decision. "Thank you," she said. "I accept." Vincent nodded and moved to his horse. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Nora said, though in truth she had only ridden a handful of times in her life. Vincent mounted first, then reached down and pulled Nora up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off, and she could feel the cold already seeping through his flannel shirt. He did not complain, just turned his horse and started back the way he had come. The ride to the Double V Ranch was the longest 2 miles of Nora's life. She could feel Vincent shivering beneath her hands, his body trying to generate warmth without the protection of his coat. She felt guilty for taking it, but she also knew that she would not have survived the walk without it. The wind continued to howl across the prairie, and snow began to fall in thin, icy flakes that stung her face. Finally, they crested a small rise, and Nora saw lights in the distance. The Double V Ranch was larger than she had expected, with a big house, several barns, and a collection of smaller buildings scattered across the property. Vincent rode past the main house and stopped in front of a small log cabin set back from the others. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and Nora realized that someone had already lit a fire inside. Vincent dismounted and helped Nora down. Her legs were so numb she nearly collapsed, but he caught her and held her steady until she found her balance. Then he led her to the cabin door and pushed it open. The interior was simple but clean. There was a small bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove that radiated blessed heat, and a few shelves on the wall. It was the most beautiful place Nora had ever seen. "I asked one of the hands to come ahead and get the fire going," Vincent explained. His voice was rough, and Nora could see that his lips were turning blue. "There are blankets on the bed, and there should be some supplies in the cupboard. I will bring you something to eat once I get warmed up myself." "Please," Nora said, starting to take off his coat. "Take this back. You are freezing." Vincent shook his head. "Keep it for now. I am heading straight to the bunkhouse, and there is a stove there." He paused at the door and looked back at her. "Lock this behind me. I will knock 3 times when I come back so you know it is me." Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness and swirling snow. Nora locked the door as he had instructed, then moved to the stove and held her hands out to the warmth. Slowly, painfully, feeling began to return to her fingers and toes. She took off Vincent's coat and hung it carefully on a peg by the door, then wrapped herself in one of the blankets from the bed. She should have felt afraid, alone in a strange place with no idea what would happen next. But instead, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt safe. True to his word, Vincent returned about an hour later with a plate of food and a pot of hot coffee. Nora had found a comb in her bag and managed to tidy her dark hair, though there was nothing she could do about her worn dress or the circles under her eyes. When she opened the door to his 3 knocks, She saw that Vincent had changed into dry clothes and put on a different coat. His color was better, though she could still see the exhaustion in his face. "Thank you," Nora said, accepting the plate. It was piled with beef stew, bread, and what looked like apple pie. Her stomach growled loudly, and Vincent smiled for the first time since she had met him. "Eat," he said. "You look like you have not had a decent meal in weeks." Nora could not deny it. She sat at the table and ate while Vincent poured coffee for both of them and took the other chair. For a while, neither of them spoke. Nora was too focused on the food, and Vincent seemed content to simply sit in silence. Finally, when she had scraped the plate clean and drained her coffee, Nora said, "I do not know how to thank you properly. You may have saved my life tonight." Vincent shrugged. "Any decent person would have done the same." "That has not been my experience," Nora said quietly. Vincent studied her across the table. "Where are you from?" "Chicago," Nora said. "I came west 3 months ago. I had a position lined up with a family in Fargo, but when I arrived, they informed me that they had already hired someone else. I tried to find other work, but nothing lasted. I ended up here in Bismarck because it was where the money ran out." "You have no family?" Nora shook her head. "My parents died of cholera when I was 16. I have been on my own since then." She did not mention the years of struggle, the positions lost through no fault of her own, the men who had made improper suggestions when they learned she was alone in the world. Those were not stories for a first meeting. Vincent nodded slowly. "The foreman here at the Double V is my uncle, Thomas Vale. He is a fair man. I will talk to him in the morning about finding you some work. We always need help with mending and cooking, especially now with winter setting in and the hands spending more time in the bunkhouse." "I am a very good seamstress," Nora said quickly. "And I can cook and clean and do laundry. I'm not afraid of hard work." "I believe you," Vincent said. He stood and collected the empty plate. "Get some rest. I will come by in the morning and take you to meet my uncle." After he left, Nora lay in the small bed and listened to the wind howling outside. She should have been worried about the future, about what would happen if Vincent's uncle did not hire her. But instead, she found herself thinking about the cowboy who had given her his coat and walked home cold. She wondered what kind of man did such a thing for a stranger. She wondered if she would ever be able to repay him. Sleep came more easily than it had in weeks. Morning arrived cold and bright. Nora woke to find frost on the inside of the window and her breath visible in the air. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers during the night. She quickly got up and added wood, coaxing the flames back to life. Then she did her best to make herself presentable, brushing the dust from her dress and pinning her hair up in a neat bun. She wished desperately that she had a better dress to wear, but this was all she had. Vincent's knock came just as she was finishing. She opened the door to find him standing there with another plate of food, this time pancakes and bacon, and a shy smile on his face that made him look younger than she had thought. In the daylight, she could see that he was perhaps 25 or 26, with dark brown hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. There was a scar above his right eyebrow, and his hands were scarred and calloused from years of hard work. "Good morning," he said. "I thought you might be hungry." Nora accepted the plate gratefully. "You are going to spoil me with all this kindness." "You look like you could use some spoiling," Vincent said honestly. Then he seemed to realize how forward that sounded and cleared his throat. "I mean, you look like you have been having a hard time." "I have," Nora admitted. She invited him in and offered him coffee, which she had made using the supplies in the cupboard. They sat at the table together, and Nora found that she enjoyed his company. Vincent was not much of a talker, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and genuine. After breakfast, Vincent walked her to the main ranch house to meet his uncle. Thomas Vale turned out to be a man in his early 50s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He looked Nora up and down with sharp eyes, then asked her a series of questions about her skills and experience. Nora answered honestly, not embellishing but also not downplaying what she could do. Finally, Thomas said, "We can give you a trial period. 2 weeks. You will mend clothes for the hands, help with cooking and cleaning, and do whatever other tasks come up. In exchange, you get room and board in the cabin and $5 a week. If you work out, we will make it permanent and increase your wages. Fair." "More than fair," Nora said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you, sir. I will not disappoint you." Thomas nodded. "Vincent speaks highly of you, and he is a good judge of character. Do not make him a liar." But there was a hint of warmth in his stern expression. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She woke before dawn to help the ranch cook, a cheerful woman named Martha, prepare breakfast for the hands. Then she spent the morning mending torn shirts and trousers, patching holes worn by saddles and barbed wire. In the afternoons, she helped Martha with lunch and dinner preparation, peeled endless buckets of potatoes and scrubbed pots until her hands were raw. At night, she fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. Vincent checked on her every day, usually bringing her something she needed or simply stopping by to chat for a few minutes. Nora found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. There was something steady and dependable about him, something that made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. He told her about his life on the ranch, how he had come to work for his uncle 5 years ago after his own father died and left him with nothing but debts. He talked about the horses he trained and the cattle drives he had been on. In turn, Nora told him about growing up in Chicago, about her mother's love of music and her father's skill with carpentry. They were becoming friends, Nora realized. Real friends, not the superficial acquaintances she had made in other towns. And maybe, if she was honest with herself, she was beginning to feel something more than friendship. At the end of the 2 weeks, Thomas Vale called Nora to his office. She went with some trepidation, unsure whether she had met his expectations. But when she entered, he was smiling. "You are a hard worker, Miss Jenkins," he said. "Martha says you are the best help she has had in years, and the hands tell me their clothes have never been in better repair. I would like to offer you a permanent position here at $8 a week, with room and board included." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you so much. You earned it," Thomas said gruffly. "Now get back to work before Martha thinks I am keeping you from helping with dinner." Christmas came and went, and with it the coldest part of winter. Nora spent Christmas Day helping Martha prepare a feast for everyone on the ranch. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread and pies, and even a cake that Martha had made specially. In the evening, the hands gathered in the bunkhouse and sang songs while one of the men played a battered guitar. Vincent sat next to Nora on a bench near the stove, and at one point he reached over and squeezed her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it made Nora's heart race. After the singing ended and people began to drift away, Vincent walked Nora back to her cabin. The night was clear and cold, and the stars seemed to hang low in the sky, close enough to touch. "I have something for you," Vincent said when they reached her door. He pulled a small package from his coat pocket and handed it to her. Nora unwrapped it carefully and found a pair of leather gloves, beautifully made and lined with soft fur. They were the most luxurious thing she had owned in years. "Vincent, I cannot accept these," she said, though she desperately wanted to. "They must have cost a fortune." "I did not buy them," Vincent said. "I made them. I used to work with a tanner before I came here, and I remembered how. I thought you could use something warmer than those thin things you have been wearing." Nora looked at the gloves, then at Vincent. "You made these. For me." "Who else would I make them for?" Vincent said, and there was something in his voice that made Nora's breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, before she could think better of it, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Vincent went very still. For a moment, Nora thought she had made a terrible mistake. But then he turned his head, and his lips found hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Vincent rested his forehead against hers and said, "I have wanted to do that since the night I found you on the road." "I have wanted you to do that since the morning you brought me pancakes," Nora admitted. Vincent laughed, and the sound was warm and rich. "We should probably talk about this." "Probably," Nora agreed. But first she kissed him again, because she had wanted to do that for so long, and now she finally could. They talked for hours that night, standing outside Nora's cabin in the freezing cold, too wrapped up in each other to notice the temperature. Vincent told her that he had been lonely for a long time, that he had never met anyone who understood him the way she seemed to. Nora confessed that she had given up on the idea of love after years of disappointment, but that Vincent made her want to hope again. "I do not have much to offer," Vincent said honestly. "I make decent wages, but I have been sending most of it back to my mother and sisters in Missouri. It will be years before I can afford to buy my own place." "I do not need a big house or fancy things," Nora said. "I just need someone who will be kind to me and not leave when things get hard." "I can promise you that," Vincent said. "I can promise you that and more." January turned into February, and winter began to loosen its grip on the Dakota territory. Vincent and Nora courted in whatever spare moments they could find. He would walk her to the main house in the mornings before heading out to work with the cattle. She would save him the biggest piece of pie at dinner. On Sunday afternoons, when the ranch was quiet, they would go for walks along the frozen river, talking about everything and nothing. The other ranch hands noticed, of course, and there was some good-natured teasing. But Thomas Vale was pleased. He told Vincent privately that Nora was good for him, that she had brought out a side of him that had been buried under grief and responsibility for too long. In March, when the first signs of spring began to appear, Vincent asked Nora to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Vincent had been quiet all evening, and Nora had been wondering what was on his mind. "Nora," he said finally, "I know we have not been courting very long, but I am sure of my feelings. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Nora felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Vincent pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "I do not have a ring yet," he said apologetically. "But I will get you one, I promise." "I do not need a ring," Nora said. "I just need you." They were married in April in a simple ceremony at the small church in Bismarck. Martha stood up as Nora's attendant and Thomas walked her down the aisle. Vincent wore his best suit, which he had to borrow from one of the other hands because he did not own one. Nora wore a dress that she and Martha had made together from fabric that Thomas had given them as a wedding gift. It was a pale blue color that matched the spring sky, and it made Nora feel like a princess. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the ranch. The hands had pooled their money to buy a pig, which they roasted over an open fire. There was music and dancing and more food than Nora had seen in one place since she was a child. Vincent danced with her under the stars, holding her close and whispering promises in her ear. Thomas had given them a gift as well. He offered to let them fix up an old homestead on the edge of the ranch property. It needed work, but it had good bones, and it would give them a place of their own. Vincent accepted gratefully, and he and Nora moved their few belongings to the homestead the next day. The house was small, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. Over the next few months, they worked together to make it a home. Vincent repaired the roof and chinked the walls to keep out the wind. Nora sewed curtains for the windows and made quilts for their bed. They planted a garden and bought a few chickens. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way that nothing else had ever been. Nora continued to work for the ranch, though Martha had trained another girl to help with the cooking, so Nora could focus more on mending and other tasks she could do from home. Vincent still worked as a ranch hand, but Thomas had promoted him to head wrangler, which came with better pay and more responsibility. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Nora would wake early and make breakfast for Vincent before he left for work. She would spend the day mending clothes, tending the garden, and managing the small household. In the evenings, Vincent would come home tired and dirty, and Nora would have dinner waiting. They would eat together, then sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the prairie. It was not an easy life, but it was a good one. And for the first time since her parents died, Nora felt truly happy. In November, almost a year after that cold night when Vincent had given her his coat, Nora realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent over dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. She did not know what kind of father he would be, if he would be happy about a child or worried about another mouth to feed. But Vincent's face lit up with joy. He picked Nora up and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Nora asked, though the answer was obvious. "Happy." Vincent set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Nora, you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a reason to wake up in the morning. Of course I am happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Nora was sick for the first few months, and she worried constantly about whether she would be a good mother. But Vincent was patient and kind, holding her hair when she was ill and reassuring her that she would be wonderful. Martha came by often with advice and supplies, and even Thomas stopped by once to gruffly congratulate them and tell Nora to take it easy. In June 1885, after a long and difficult labor, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel, after Vincent's father. Vincent cried when he held his son for the first time, and Nora fell even more in love with him watching him cradle the tiny baby with such care. Being parents changed them both. Vincent became even more serious and hardworking, determined to provide for his growing family. Nora discovered a strength she had not known she possessed, managing the household and caring for Daniel with a confidence that surprised her. They were tired all the time, but they were also happier than they had ever been. When Daniel was 6 months old, Thomas called Vincent to his office. Nora waited nervously at home, wondering what it could be about. When Vincent returned, he was grinning from ear to ear. "Thomas is getting older," Vincent explained. "He wants to start stepping back from running the ranch. He offered me a partnership. If I can come up with $1,000 for a stake, he will make me a junior partner and eventually turn the whole operation over to me." Nora's heart sank. $1,000. "Vincent, we do not have anywhere near that much saved." "I know," Vincent said. "But Thomas said I have 5 years to come up with it. We can do it, Nora. If we are careful with our money and I take on extra work during the off-season, we can do it." It would not be easy, Nora knew. But looking at Vincent's hopeful face, she could not bear to discourage him. "Then we will do it," she said firmly. The next 5 years were the hardest of their lives. Vincent worked from dawn until long after dark, taking on any job that would earn extra money. He broke horses for neighboring ranches, repaired fences, and even worked as a guide for hunting parties from the east. Nora took in more mending than ever before, her fingers flying through the work even as she cared for Daniel and kept the household running. They had 2 more children during those years. A daughter named Sarah arrived when Daniel was 3, and another boy, Michael, when Sarah was 2. Money was always tight, and there were times when Nora wondered if they would make it. But Vincent never gave up, and she refused to let him face the struggle alone. Finally, in the spring of 1890, Vincent counted out the last of the money they needed. It had taken every penny they could scrape together, but they had done it. Vincent became a junior partner in the Double V Ranch, and Thomas began teaching him everything he needed to know about running the operation. 2 years later, Thomas decided it was time to retire. He moved to town to live with his daughter, and Vincent took over full management of the ranch. It was a huge responsibility, but Vincent was ready. He had learned from the best, and he had Nora by his side. The ranch prospered under Vincent's leadership. He had a gift for knowing which cattle would bring the best prices and when to sell. He treated the ranch hands fairly, and they responded with loyalty and hard work. Slowly but surely, the Vales built a reputation as one of the most respected families in the territory. As the children grew, they each found their place on the ranch. Daniel, serious and hardworking like his father, loved working with the cattle. Sarah was gentle with the horses and became an excellent rider. Michael was the adventurous one, always getting into mischief but with a heart of gold. Nora watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Sometimes, usually on quiet evenings when Vincent was out checking on the herd, she would think back to that cold December night in 1883. She would remember how desperate and alone she had felt, standing on that frozen road with nowhere to go. She would remember Vincent riding out of the darkness like something from a fairy tale, offering her his coat without a second thought. That act of kindness had changed everything. It had given her not just a warm coat but a future, a family, a life worth living. She made sure to teach her children the importance of helping others, of showing kindness to strangers. She told them the story of how their parents met, and they never tired of hearing it. Vincent, for his part, never took credit for what he had done. "I just gave you my coat," he would say whenever Nora thanked him for saving her life. "You are the one who built this life with me. You are the one who turned a borrowed coat into a home." But Nora knew better. Vincent had given her more than warmth that night. He had given her hope. In 1895, Bismarck was officially incorporated as a city, and the Wild West that Nora and Vincent had known was slowly fading into memory. The railroad had brought civilization and commerce, and the dangerous, lawless days were mostly behind them. The Dakota Territory had become North Dakota, one of the newest states in the Union. The Vales were now one of the most established families in the region. Vincent sat on the town council and was often consulted on matters of business and politics. Nora had started a small school on the ranch property, teaching not just her own children but the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders. She found that she loved teaching, loved seeing young minds light up with understanding. Their original homestead, the little 3-room house that Vincent had repaired with his own hands, was still standing. They had built a larger house closer to the main ranch buildings as the family grew, but they kept the old place maintained. Sometimes, on their anniversary, Vincent and Nora would walk out there and sit on the porch, remembering their early days together. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked one such evening. They were both in their late 30s now, their hair starting to show threads of gray. "Coming west, I mean, ending up in Bismarck with nothing." Nora looked at him in surprise. "How could I regret something that brought me to you? You could have had an easier life somewhere else." Vincent said. "If you had stayed in Chicago, or if you had made it to that position in Fargo." Nora took his hand and squeezed it. "Vincent Vale, I have had exactly the life I was meant to have. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear and doubt led me to that road on that cold December night, and you were there, waiting to save me." She paused, then added softly, "Though I think perhaps we saved each other." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I love you, Nora Vale. I loved you the moment I saw you shivering on that road, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Nora said. "Thank you for giving me your coat." "Thank you for accepting it," Vincent replied. As the years continued to pass, the Vale family remained strong. Daniel grew into a fine young man and eventually took over day-to-day operations of the ranch, allowing Vincent to step back slightly. He married a schoolteacher from town, a bright young woman named Elizabeth, and they gave Nora and Vincent their first grandchild in 1898. Sarah married a veterinarian who set up practice in Bismarck. She continued to work with horses, breeding and training some of the finest stock in North Dakota. Michael, true to his adventurous nature, joined the army for a few years before returning home to work on the ranch and marry his childhood sweetheart. Nora and Vincent watched their children build their own lives with the same mixture of joy and melancholy that all parents feel. But they were proud of what they had created, not just in terms of the successful ranch or the thriving family, but in the love and kindness that seemed to flow naturally from their children. In the early 1900s, when they were both in their 50s, Vincent and Nora took a trip back to Chicago. It was the first time Nora had been back since leaving 20 years earlier. The city had changed dramatically, growing and modernizing in ways that made it almost unrecognizable. They visited the neighborhood where Nora had grown up, and she showed Vincent the apartment where she had lived with her parents. "It is so small," she said, looking up at the building. "I remembered it being much bigger." "Everything seems bigger when we are young," Vincent said. They also visited the train station where Nora had begun her journey west. Standing on the platform, Nora thought about the frightened, desperate young woman she had been. That Nora seemed like a different person now, someone from another lifetime. "Do you know what I remember most about coming west?" Nora said. "I remember sitting on the train and watching the landscape change. The buildings got smaller and farther apart. The trees disappeared and the prairie stretched out forever. I remember thinking that I was traveling to the edge of the world, that I would fall off if I went any farther." "And did you fall off the edge of the world?" Vincent asked with a smile. "No," Nora said. "I flew." They returned to North Dakota with a renewed appreciation for the life they had built. The trip had reminded them that home was not a place you were born, but a place you chose, a place you built with love and determination, and the help of people who cared about you. As they entered their 60s, Vincent and Nora began to slow down. Vincent's hair had gone completely gray, and his joints ached on cold mornings. Nora's hands, worn from years of sewing and hard work, sometimes trembled when she held a needle. But they were healthy and active, still involved in the ranch and the community. They had 14 grandchildren by then, ranging from infants to teenagers. The Vale name was well respected throughout North Dakota, associated with honesty, hard work, and generosity. Vincent and Nora had never forgotten what it was like to struggle, and they made sure to help others whenever they could. They hired workers who needed a fresh start, just as Thomas had given Vincent a chance all those years ago. They donated to the church and the school. They opened their home to anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. One winter evening, when Vincent was 65 and Nora was 62, they sat together in front of the fireplace in their living room. Their children and grandchildren had all gone home after a big Sunday dinner, and the house was quiet. Vincent had his arm around Nora, and she was leaning against his shoulder. "I have been thinking," Vincent said, "about that night I found you on the road." "You think about that night often," Nora said with a smile. "I do," Vincent admitted, "because that was the night everything changed. I had been so focused on work, on sending money to my mother, on just surviving. I was not really living. And then there you were, this woman who needed help, and something inside me just knew." "Knew what?" Nora asked. "Knew that you were going to be important to me," Vincent said. "I did not know how or why, but I knew. And I knew that if I did not help you, I would regret it for the rest of my life." Nora turned to look at him. "I knew too. When you wrapped that coat around me, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt safe. I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right." "Were they?" Vincent asked. "All right, I mean." "They were better than all right," Nora said. "They were perfect," Vincent laughed. "I do not know about perfect. We have had our share of struggles." "Every life has struggles," Nora said, "but we faced them together. That is what made them bearable." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Finally, Vincent said, "I would do it again, you know. Walk home cold, I mean. I would do it 1,000 times if it meant having this life with you." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. After all these years, Vincent could still make her cry with his simple, honest words. "I would freeze on that road 1,000 times if it meant you would be the one to find me." Vincent kissed her then, gentle and sweet, the way he always had. And in that kiss was everything they had been through together. The cold winter nights and the warm summer days. The struggles and the triumphs. The children and the grandchildren. The love that had sustained them through 40 years of marriage and would sustain them for however many years they had left. North Dakota continued to change and modernize around them. Cars began to replace horses. Electricity came to the ranch. The children talked about something called an airplane that could fly people through the air. But through all the changes, the Vale family remained constant, anchored by the love story that had begun on a frozen road in December 1883. Vincent and Nora lived to see the 1920s, watching as the world they had known transformed into something almost unrecognizable. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1935 with all of their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren in attendance. It was a joyous occasion, though both of them were moving slowly by then, their bodies worn down by years of hard work and hard winters. On their anniversary, Daniel stood up and gave a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "They taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. They showed us that kindness to strangers can change lives. They built something lasting. Not just this ranch, but a family that will carry on their values for generations to come." Everyone drank to that, and Nora wiped tears from her eyes. Later, when the party had quieted down and most people had gone home, she and Vincent sat together on the porch of their home, looking out at the ranch that had been their life's work. "We did all right," Vincent said. "Did we not?" "We did better than all right," Nora replied. "We did wonderfully." Vincent was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want you to know something, Nora. If I could go back and live my life over again, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, not one decision. Because every choice I made led me to you, and you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Nora took his hand and held it tight. "I feel the same way. You saved my life that night, Vincent. And every day since then, you have given me reasons to be grateful that you did." They sat together until the stars came out, two old people who had built a life together from nothing but determination and love. When the cold became too much, Vincent helped Nora up, and they went inside together, just as they had done thousands of times before. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1937, at the age of 79. Nora held his hand as he drew his last breath, and though her heart was breaking, she was grateful that he had not suffered. The funeral was one of the largest Bismarck had ever seen, with people coming from all over the state to pay their respects to a man who had lived with honor and integrity. After Vincent died, Nora moved in with Daniel and Elizabeth. She was 74 years old, and though her body was frail, her mind was still sharp. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days. Her favorite story to tell was how she met Vincent, and the children never tired of hearing about the cowboy who gave a freezing woman his coat and walked home cold. Nora lived for 5 more years, long enough to see the start of World War II, though she did not live to see its end. She died in the winter of 1942, surrounded by her family at the age of 79. Her last words were, "Tell Vincent I am coming to find him, and this time I am bringing my own coat." She was buried next to Vincent in the cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, Daniel had inscribed a simple phrase. She was shivering. He gave her his coat. They built a life. The Vale family continued to thrive after Nora and Vincent were gone. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. The story of how it all began, with a cowboy and a freezing woman on a cold December night, became family legend. It was told at weddings and christenings, at holiday gatherings and quiet evenings by the fire. And in Bismarck, North Dakota, there is still a small plaque on what used to be the road where Vincent found Nora. It was placed there by their great-grandchildren in 1983, exactly 100 years after that fateful night. The plaque reads, "On this spot in December 1883, Vincent Vale gave Nora Jenkins his coat and changed 2 lives forever. Let this be a reminder that kindness to strangers can change the world." People still stop to read the plaque when they pass by, though few of them know the full story. They do not know about the struggles that came after, or the joy, or the love that sustained 2 people through 50 years of marriage. They do not know about the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry on the Vale name and values. But perhaps that is all right. Perhaps the important thing is not that everyone knows the story, but that the story exists at all. That somewhere in North Dakota, a man once gave his coat to a freezing woman and walked home cold. And from that simple act of kindness grew a love that lasted a lifetime and a legacy that continues to this day. Because that is what love does. It takes small moments of kindness and transforms them into something lasting. It takes 2 people who are struggling alone and shows them that together they can build something beautiful. It takes a cold December night and turns it into a warm memory that spans generations. Vincent and Nora Vale understood that. They lived it every day of their lives together. And their story, passed down through the years, continues to inspire everyone who hears it. It reminds us that we are never truly alone, not when there are still people in the world willing to give their coat to a stranger. It reminds us that the smallest acts of kindness can have the biggest consequences. And it reminds us that love, real love, is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about choosing each other every single day, through cold winters and warm summers, through struggles and triumphs, through everything life throws at you. Vincent wrapped Nora in his coat and walked home cold. But he was never truly cold again, not when he had Nora's love to warm him. And Nora never shivered again, not when she had Vincent by her side. That is the true end of their story. Not death or separation, but the warmth of a love that transcended everything else. A love that began with a coat on a frozen road and ended only when they were reunited beyond this life. Their children and grandchildren still tell the story, keeping the memory alive. And every time it is told, it changes someone. It makes them think about the strangers they pass on the street, the people who might need help, the small kindnesses that could change a life. Because that is the power of love stories like this one. They do not just entertain. They inspire. They challenge us to be better, to be kinder, to be more like Vincent and Nora Vale. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Vincent and Nora are together again. He is probably still trying to give her his coat, and she is probably still telling him that she has her own now. They are probably laughing, the way they always did, finding joy in the simple pleasure of being together. That is how their story truly ends. Not with gravestones in a North Dakota cemetery, but with two souls reunited, their love eternal, their legacy secure in the hearts and minds of everyone who heard their story and was changed by it. The cowboy gave the freezing woman his coat, and in return, she gave him everything. A home, a family, a purpose, a love that would last not just a lifetime but forever. That is the story of Vincent and Nora Vale. That is the story of a love that began in the coldest part of winter and bloomed into something warm enough to last through generations. That is the story that proves beyond any doubt that kindness matters, that love endures, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest gestures. A coat given freely on a frozen road. A life built together from nothing. A love that never died. That is the true story. That is the only story that matters. And it is a story with the happiest ending of all.